Hello, welcome back to the Arturia DX-7B tutorial. Today we're mopping up the remainder of the controls that we haven't looked at yet. Let's start down here, and we've got a feedback control which you may recall we've already dealt with. Each operator has its own feedback level, but there is a master feedback control for the synth. Now this knob here only does anything with any operators that have the little loopback feedback symbol in the algorithm itself. So since we're currently dealing with operator 1, and I'll put it in sawtooth so everything's really easy to hear. Okay, so there's operator 1 operating as a sawtooth and no feedback difference whatsoever. However, operator 6, which has the feedback loop, if we find an algorithm that's got one, turn operator 6 up and operator 1 down. So there's our sine wave, flip it to a saw very quickly, and then there's the feedback. But other than that, everything that we talked about in the individual operators applies to this control. Next to it we've got pitch EG. Now, even though we dealt with the pitch envelope generator when we had to look at the envelopes tab, I don't think I ever specifically mentioned that every operator can subscribe or unsubscribe to that feature, and that's done here. That subscription layer is then further affected by the overall synthesizer pitch EG setting. So let's just step through this one at a time, and the first thing that I'll do is get us back to our really simple default sound on operator 1. Jump very quickly over to the pitch envelope generator and give us a really pretty obvious pitch modulation. Okay, there's the slope. Now if I turn pitch envelope generator all the way down, it goes away. So this is a variable amount that's applied to the entire synth. And then underneath that, I can subscribe or unsubscribe at the operator level. So there's there's operator 1 turned off. Flip over to operator 3, which is currently acting as a carrier. So there's envelope operator 3 modulating the pitch, and operator 1 is static. Now just before we move on, something else that needs to be discussed about this pitch envelope generator control, and this applies to everything we've discussed in the synth. More often than not, I'll use single carriers and pitch or really simple filter modulation to demonstrate a feature, but you have to bear in mind every operator can also act as a modulator, and that completely changes the playing field. If I send operator 2 into operator 1, so modulator, operator 2, carrier, operator 1. Let's get operator 1 modulating its pitch again in accordance with the master overall value. So both of these operators currently have their pitch envelope generator engaged. Let's listen to what that sounds like. So all of that additional tone, all of that extra good stuff is coming from the operator 2 applying FM. There's our simple sine wave. But can you hear that everything is tonally consistent? Because both of those operators have their pitch envelope generator engaged, the ratios are always aligned. If I disengage the pitch envelope generator for operator 2, it's now playing effectively a static note, even though it's acting as an operator, a modulator. But behind the scenes, operator 1's pitch is being modulated, and you get a completely different, far more dissonant effect. It's absolutely chalk and cheese from the original instance, and that's the pitch envelope generator being decoupled on the modulator. It just goes to show how dramatically or significant rather than important it is to have your pitches of your various operators in any individual algorithm stream all aligned. The moment you decouple them, and it's totally fine to do so, you know, there are no rules, but just be aware that you head into atonal territory. So I'll just shut the pitch envelope generator off again. So we've got a classic FM kind of sound going on here, and we'll stick with that for a while. The next control along we've got is Polyphony. Now, in order to talk a little bit more about this control, I'm just going to open up these advanced pages as well. Because on the settings tab, we've got a couple of values that are really important when we're talking about polyphony. And this number 16 here is the synthesizer's current default polyphony value. If I set that to 2 and play a 3-note chord, I'm playing a 3rd note here and you don't hear it. Now, most synthesizers, or many synthesizers, have first in, first out policy, which means that when I play that 3rd note, the original C would get thrown away. That's not the case with DX-7. Once it reaches its limit of polyphony, it ignores any other notes that are played. So I'll hold 2 notes down and then just continue playing all these notes on the keyboard. You don't hear any of them. 16 is the original polyphony of the authentic synthesizer, but we can go to 32. If I turn polyphony off from this control at the bottom of the keyboard, can you see this light just flipped? So these two controls are linked. And so in mono, polyphony is grayed out, and now the keyboard does apply first in, first out policy. So I'll press 5 notes on the keyboard. I've got all 5 held down at the moment, so it's tracking the last note I played. So different behavior between mono and poly. Let's just stick in mono for a moment and jump across to portamento. We're not done with polyphony, we're going to come back. But I just want to have a talk about portamento because it's much easier to demonstrate in monophonic mode. Portamento is on by default, but the time is set to 0. So if I press a C and then a C an octave above, 2 notes, nothing dramatic there. Introduce some time for my portamento, and we get a glide up. Can you see that we have the fingered option here, which means we only get portamento if I hold both of those notes down simultaneously. If I press 1 and then let go, and then press another and let go, you only ever hear 1 note. In full-time mode, doesn't matter, I can let go of the keys and it will still remember what that last note was and then portamento up to it. What glissando does is splits that glide up into semitone intervals. So if I turn gliss on, head back to fingered mode so that we can be in control of what's going on and make the time maximum. Pretty obvious what's going on there. If I bring the time down low enough, that's why I had to increase the time there to make it really obvious what was going on. I'll play the same gliss notes again. They're so finely kind of merged together that it becomes increasingly difficult to identify the glissando. Okay, let's turn portamento back off and carry on our discussion of polyphony. And what I want to talk about now is unison mode. So we currently have 16 notes available to us in our polyphony. And I just played a 3-note chord there. So I'm using 3 voices. What unison does is say, for every note that I play, how many voices do I want to assign to that note? And it really thickens the sound up. Unison is one of the hidden gems of synthesizers. Get used to using this. It's a heavy CPU burden because the synth is now generating 3 times more sounds. I'll play a single note, and on 1, it's just louder. But the really majestic thing about unison comes when you start detuning each of the voices, and unison detune is this control here. The moment I introduce any amount of detune to those 3 voices, magical things happen. And now those 3 voices are playing at different pitches and just interacting with each other in a really, really beautiful way. Again, a single note. So that's a specific feature of synthesis called unison detune, which is kind of in the family of phases and flanges and choruses and all those kinds of modulating effects, but it is its own thing in its own right. One final thing to mention about unison is that it automatically accounts for the maximum polyphony the synth has to offer. So we never have more than 32 voices available to us. That's an intrinsic limit of the synth. But if we choose Unison 3, then you see that polyphony has been restricted to 8, because it's basically saying you can play 8 keys on the keyboard. I'm going to use 3 voices for each of those. That's a maximum of 24 voices. The next polyphony step up, which is 16, would blow the synth limit. 16 times 3 is 48, and that's more than the 32 voices that the synth can handle. So as you increase unison, you can see I've gone to 6 here, then the polyphony gets further and further restricted, ensuring that the synth is capable of satisfying your requirements. Throw all that stuff away, get back to our default sound. Arpeggiator, this is pretty straightforward. I'm going to press C-E-G. So the difference between the arpeggiator on the main synth and the sequencer that we dealt with in the last episode is that this is just about notes. The sequencer is a fully featured modulation matrix capable monster that's capable of doing all sorts of crazy stuff. This is just an arpeggiator and it just deals with notes, and it's really elegant in that respect. Here's our pattern. That was an as played pattern, but let's go up and down over the span of 2 octaves. So that was C, E, G. Now can you hear it's playing all of those notes up and down? That's because the upper and lower notes are included in the sequence. If I switch to exclude, then it only plays the upper and lower notes once. So it's not doubling on those limit notes. Hold, pretty self-explanatory, and sync allows us to specify the rate in hertz. And that's all for this episode. In the next episode, we're going to take all of this stuff that we dealt with in the previous episodes, talking about really restricted single-use pitch shifting and filtering, and we're going to start exploring it in the context of real-world sounds, and we'll do that with our first preset deep dive. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please click the button to say so, and have a look at the Patreon links below. Really appreciate your support. See you next time. Thanks very much.